If you are not meant to be seen, then do not stand where the light falls, someone said, just as the music faltered and the first glass slipped from Elena Whitmore's hand. It did not shatter immediately, not at first. It struck the polished marble and spun, a thin ringing sound cutting through the orchestra before the crystal finally fractured and red wine spread across the floor in a slow, deliberate stain. She froze where she stood, fingers still curved as if the tray had not already left them. Her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her ribs. The ballroom did not stop all at once. It unraveled, laughter thinning, conversations stalling, heads turning in small increments until the weight of attention settled, heavy and unmistakable. She lowered herself quickly, too quickly, the hem of her worn ivory dress brushing against the spill as she reached for the broken glass, her movements careful, practiced, invisible in the way she had learned to be. A shoe stepped near her. Hand, then another, skirts shifting aside not to help but to avoid. Careful. A woman murmured, not to her but about her, as though she were something that might stain. Elena kept her eyes down. It was easier that way. It had always been easier that way. She gathered the largest shard between her fingers, the edge catching the light just long enough to reflect a distorted version of the chandeliers above. Gold, endless, unreachable. You were never the one, a voice said somewhere behind her. Low, almost thoughtful, and the words landed without force and without mercy. She did not look up. She did not need to. She knew the tone, the kind that closed doors quietly instead of slamming them. Her hand tightened, just slightly, the shard pressing into the fabric of her glove, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind her that she was still there, still present, still inconveniently real. The orchestra attempted to recover, a violin finding its place, then losing it again as the sound of the great doors at the far end of the ballroom shifted the air. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The hinges moved with a controlled ease, and a draft followed, cool against the back of her neck. She felt it before she saw him. Most people did. Conversations did not stop this time. They simply failed to continue. A silence moved through the room in waves, subtle, deliberate, until even the servants at the edges of the walls stood a fraction straighter. Elena remained on her knees. The marble beneath her palms was cold, grounding, real. She reached for another piece of glass, her fingers brushing the edge of the spill, the wine seeping into the threads of her glove. A hand closed around her. Upper arm, not harsh, but firm enough to direct. Up, her cousin whispered sharply, the word pressed between clenched teeth. Not here. Elena rose halfway. Unsteady, the world tilting just slightly as she was pulled back toward the shadowed edge of the room where she belonged. She kept her gaze lowered, the discipline of it ingrained. But something shifted, something in the way the space in front of her changed. The crowd did not part quickly, not dramatically, but it did part, inch by inch, as though making room for something inevitable. She felt it before she saw it. The weight of a gaze that did not slide past her. She stilled. Not completely, not obviously, just enough. Her fingers loosened from the cloth she still held, the damp fabric slipping slightly in her grip. There was a pause, a narrow, precise pause, the kind that exists just before a decision becomes visible. She lifted her eyes, not all the way, just enough to see the line of a dark coat, the clean edge of a cuff, the faint movement of a hand adjusting a glove with measured control. Duke Adrian Blackthorne did not look at the stain on the floor. He did not look at the cluster of startled nobles or the servants trying to recover the illusion of order. He looked at her, not briefly, not by accident. The room seemed to narrow, the distance between them compressing without either of them moving. Elena felt her breath shift again, slower this time, steadier, though she could not have said why. She was aware, suddenly, of everything. The loosened pin at the back of her hair, the faint tremor in her wrist, the sound of a single drop of wine falling from the edge of the cloth onto the marble. He took one step forward, then another, not hurried, not hesitant, simply decided. Someone spoke, somewhere to the side, a soft attempt at redirection, a name, a title, an offer of attention more appropriate for a man of his standing. He did not respond. He did not even turn. Elena's cousin's grip tightened for a fraction of a second before loosening, uncertainty replacing insistence. Elena did not move. She could not have, even if she had wanted to. The space between them closed, not completely, not yet, but enough that she could see the exact shade of his eyes when he finally stopped. Not silver, not entirely gray. Something colder, something clearer. He said nothing, not immediately. His gaze moved, not over her, not past her, but to her hands, to the stained glove, to the shard of glass still caught in the fabric. And for a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to hold itself in place, suspended on that single, precise observation. He did not take the glass from her hand, not immediately. Instead, his fingers hovered just above the stained fabric, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him without contact, and that was somehow worse. Elena's breath slowed, not by choice, but because the space around them demanded it. The room had not resumed, it had simply paused, suspended in that delicate, unbearable stretch where everyone was waiting for him to decide what this moment meant. Her cousin shifted beside her, a subtle step forward, then back, as if recalculating where she stood in relation to him. "Your Grace," she began, her voice carefully measured, polite, threaded with a quiet urgency. "It was only a small mishap. We will have it cleared at once." He did not look at her, not even a flicker. His attention remained where it had settled, precise and unmoved. Elena felt the weight of it travel, not heavy, but exact, from her hands to the slight tremor at her wrist, to the loosened thread at the edge of her glove. She became aware of the smallest things, the faint scent of polished wood, the distant crackle of candle flames, the soft rustle of silk as people adjusted their posture without daring to shift their position. He lowered his hand then, finally, not to take, but to correct. His fingers closed lightly around the fabric at her wrist, steadying it, turning it just enough for him to see the tear more clearly. The movement was controlled, deliberate, and entirely without hesitation. She did not pull away. She did not know if she could have. "You are bleeding," someone whispered from somewhere behind, though she was not. It was the wine. It had soaked through the pale fabric and darkened it in a way that suggested something else entirely. The distinction did not matter to those watching. What mattered was that he had touched her. The orchestra had not resumed. The silence had thickened, no longer fragile, but expectant. Elena lifted her gaze a fraction higher, just enough to meet his eyes fully this time. And for a moment, something shifted in the space between them. Not warmth, not softness, something sharper, something like recognition, though she could not have said of what. He released the fabric, not abruptly, but with the same controlled precision, and straightened slightly. The distance returned, but it did not feel the same as before. It felt measured now. "Chosen. Stand," he said. The word was quiet, but it carried, not because of volume, but because nothing else in the room dared to exist alongside it. Elena was already halfway upright, but she completed the motion, her spine straightening, her shoulders drawing back in a reflex she had not used in years. The cloth fell from her hand. The stained piece of linen landed softly at her feet. No one moved to pick it up. Her cousin's hand hovered near her elbow again, uncertain now, the authority she had held moments ago dissolving into something thinner. "Your Grace," she tried again, a different tone this time, less certain. "She is not." "I am aware of what she is," he said, and there was no edge in it, no raised voice. Only a clarity that cut through the rest of her sentence before it could fully form. The woman fell silent. Elena felt it then, not as a dramatic shift, not as something visible, but as a subtle rearrangement of weight in the room. The balance had moved, not entirely, not yet, but enough that the people closest to them adjusted without realizing why. A gentleman to the left took half a step back. A lady lowered her fan, then raised it again, as though unsure what expression she was meant to wear. Elena became acutely aware of her dress, of the way it fell slightly shorter at the hem than it should have, of the faint wear at the cuffs, of the ink stain near her thumb that had not fully washed out. She expected him to step away. That would have been the natural conclusion, the correction made, the disruption acknowledged, the hierarchy restored. Instead, he moved closer, not by much, a single step, but it altered the space between them entirely. She could see now the fine detail of his coat, the subtle texture of the fabric, the way the light caught at the edge of a single silver button. His hand lifted again, and for a fraction of a second, the room seemed to contract around that motion. He did not reach for her this time. He reached for the loose strand of thread at her glove, the one she had not finished securing. He drew it gently, testing the tension, then released it. The thread settled back into place, imperfect, but intact. "Who assigned you to the floor?" he asked. The question was not directed to the room. It was directed to her. Elena felt the words settle, not heavy, but undeniable. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her voice did not come immediately, not because she did not have an answer, but because she was not accustomed to being asked. "I was not assigned, Your Grace," she said finally, the words. Quiet, steady, shaped by habit. "I saw that it needed to be done." There was a pause. Not long, not empty. The kind of pause that suggested the answer had been noted and placed somewhere precise. His gaze held hers for a moment longer, then shifted, just slightly, to the space around them, to the watching eyes, the held breath, the expectation pressing in from every side. When it returned to her, it was unchanged. Or perhaps it was more defined. It was difficult to tell. "Of course you did," he said, and the words were not dismissive. They were not praise. They were something else entirely, something that did not belong to the roles the room had already assigned her. Elena felt it then. Unmistakably. The beginning of something that did not fit, not yet visible, not yet named, but present, nonetheless. No one told the orchestra to stop. They simply never found the courage to begin again. The silence settled deeper, heavier now, shaped around a single, undeniable fact that no one in the room quite knew how to address. Duke Adrian Blackthorne had not moved away. Elena stood where she was, aware of the exact distance between them, less than a foot, close enough that any further step would not be accidental. Her hands were empty now, the cloth on the floor behind her, the stain spreading slowly across the marble as if time itself had chosen to linger there. She resisted the instinct to look back at it. That version of herself had already been left behind. A shift came from the edge of the gathering, subtle but deliberate. Lady Whitmore, her aunt, stepped forward with the kind of composure that had been practiced over years of maintaining appearances that could not afford to fracture. Her posture was perfect. Her smile was not. "Your Grace," she said, inclining her head just enough to acknowledge his rank without surrendering entirely. "You are too kind to concern yourself with such minor disruptions. My niece will see herself removed at once." The word removed hung in the air longer than it should have. Elena felt it, not as an instruction, but as a correction, a quiet attempt to restore the natural order of things. She did not move, not yet, because he had not moved. Adrian did not turn toward Lady Whitmore immediately. Instead, his gaze lingered on Elena for one more measured second, as if finishing a thought he had not spoken. Then, and only then, did he shift his attention. The transition was clean, precise, complete. "Is that what you believe is happening here?" he asked. It was not a challenge. It was not quite a question. It was something in between, a space that required an answer without demanding one aloud. Lady Whitmore held his gaze for exactly the length of a breath before lowering her eyes a fraction. "I believe, Your Grace, that the evening should proceed without unnecessary attention," she said. Her hand moved, almost imperceptibly, toward Elena's sleeve, a gesture meant to guide, to reposition, to erase. Adrian's hand lifted before hers could make contact, not abruptly, not forcefully, simply there, placed between Elena and the reaching hand with a quiet finality that required no explanation. The motion was small, the effect was not. Lady Whitmore's fingers paused midair, then withdrew as though the space itself had shifted. Elena felt the absence of that touch before she registered the presence of his. Not touching her, not yet, but close enough that the intention was unmistakable. The room adjusted again. A gentleman cleared his throat and then seemed to regret it. A lady shifted her weight and then held still. The ripple moved outward, controlled, contained, but impossible to ignore. Adrian lowered his hand, not back to his side, but slightly forward, angled in a way that aligned with Elena rather than against her. It was a position, a statement, not spoken, but seen. "You have placed her in the margins," he said, his voice even, unhurried. And you expect the room to pretend that is where she belongs. There was no accusation in it, only observation. Lady Whitmore's expression tightened, not visibly to most, but enough that Elena, standing so close, could see the shift at the corner of her mouth. She has no position here, Your Grace, she replied, her tone softer now, more careful. She was brought to assist. Nothing more. Assist. The word landed with a quiet weight. Elena felt it settle against everything she had been taught to accept. She kept her gaze forward. She did not look at her aunt. She did not look at the floor. She looked at him. Adrian's head tilted slightly, not in doubt, but in consideration, as though testing the shape of the statement before deciding what it meant. Then he moved. One step. Not toward the center of the room, not toward the waiting crowd, but to the side, aligning himself fully beside Elena. The shift was subtle. The implication was not. He was no longer standing before her. He was standing with her. The distinction was small. It changed everything. Elena felt it immediately. The way the air seemed to settle differently against her shoulders, the way the space behind her no longer felt exposed. A footman at the edge of the room hesitated, tray in hand, uncertain whether to advance or retreat. The orchestra leader raised his bow slightly, then lowered it again. No one had given the signal. No one would. Adrian's hand lifted once more, this time without hesitation. His fingers closed around Elena's wrist, not to restrain, not to pull, but to anchor. The contact was firm, steady, undeniable. Her breath caught again, not sharply, but enough that she felt the shift in her chest. He did not look at her hand as he held it. He looked forward, toward the open space of the ballroom floor that had been waiting, untouched, since the music had faltered. If she has no position, he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the nearest circle of listeners, then I will define one. The words did not rise. They settled. The kind that did not require repetition to be understood. Elena felt the room change around them. In a way that was no longer subtle. The edges sharpened. The attention focused. This was no longer a moment that could be dismissed as an accident. This was a decision. Adrian turned his head then, just slightly, enough that his gaze returned to hers, and for a fraction of a second, the rest of the room fell away. Walk with me, he said, not a command, not a request, something that existed beyond both. His grip shifted, not tightening, but adjusting, guiding. Elena's feet moved before her. Thoughts could catch up. One step, then another. The marble beneath her shoes felt different now, not colder, not warmer, but claimed. They moved forward together, not quickly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that parted the space ahead of them without resistance. The crowd did not step back all at once. It yielded in increments, each person adjusting just enough to avoid being in the way of something they did not understand, but could not oppose. Lady Whitmore did not follow. She remained where she was, her expression held in place by discipline alone. Elena did not look back. She could not have, even if she had wanted to. Adrian's hand remained at her wrist, steady, constant, a point she could not ignore. The center of the ballroom opened before them, wide, waiting, untouched since the music had died. They stopped there, not at the edge, not halfway. At the center, he released her wrist then, not slowly, not reluctantly, simply letting the contact end as cleanly as it had begun. The absence of it was immediate, noticeable. She felt the space where his hand had been as though it still existed. He stepped back half a pace, enough to see her fully, enough to be seen beside her rather. Then over her, the room held its breath again, not in confusion this time, but in anticipation. Adrian lifted his hand, palm open, offered, unmistakable, not to the room, not to the crowd, to her, and in that single, suspended second, with every eye fixed on the space between them, Elena understood that whatever happened next would not return her to where she had been. No one reached for his hand. Not yet. The space between them held, suspended, fragile in a way that felt dangerously close to breaking. Elena stood at the center of the ballroom, aware of every eye, every breath, every silent judgment pressing inward, and yet none of it felt as immediate as the single, open gesture in front of her. His hand did not waver. It did not lower. It remained exactly where he had placed it. As though time itself had adjusted to accommodate the decision, a murmur rose. At the edges of the room, soft at first, then gaining shape. Not loud enough to be called a disturbance, but no longer quiet enough to ignore. This is highly irregular. A man's voice said from somewhere to the left, controlled, measured, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Elena did not turn toward it. She did not need to. The words were not meant for her. They were meant to restore something that had already begun to shift. Adrian did not acknowledge the voice. Not immediately. His gaze remained on her, steady, unbroken, as if the rest of the room had become incidental. She became aware of the smallest movement in her own body, the slight tightening of her fingers, the way her shoulders drew in before she forced them back. She had spent years making herself smaller. It was not a habit that disappeared in a single moment. Your Grace, the same voice continued, closer now, firmer. You cannot possibly intend to. Adrian lowered his hand, not in retreat, not in concession, simply to end the invitation on his terms. The motion was clean, decisive, and for a fraction of a second, the room seemed to exhale, as though the tension had resolved. It had not. It had only changed shape. He turned then, fully, toward the source of the interruption. Lord Harrington stood a few paces away, posture rigid, expression carefully composed into something that balanced respect with objection. His presence carried weight. His opinion carried expectation. State what you believe. I cannot intend, Adrian said. His tone was even, almost mild, but there was something beneath it, something that did not bend. Harrington inclined his head, just enough, to elevate a girl with no standing to the center of this floor, in front of the entire assembly. He replied, each word placed with precision. Would be misunderstood. The pause before the last word was deliberate. It allowed the implication to settle without being spoken. Elena felt it, not as a direct strike, but as a narrowing of the space around her. Misunderstood. It meant inappropriate. It meant unacceptable. It meant her presence here was an error that needed correction. Adrian's gaze did not shift. By whom? He asked. The question was simple. The effect was not. Harrington's jaw tightened, just slightly. By those who understand the structure of this society, he said. The answer came quickly, but not without effort. Adrian took a step forward, not toward Harrington, not aggressively, but enough to close the distance that had allowed the conversation to feel balanced. It was no longer balanced. Then they may begin by observing it more closely, he said. There was no emphasis, no raised voice, only a clarity that left no space for reinterpretation. A ripple moved through the crowd, sharper now, more defined. This was no longer a private deviation. It was a public contradiction. Elena stood where she was, the center of something she had never been meant to occupy, her pulse steadying not because the moment had become easier, but because it had become inevitable. Adrian turned back to her. The movement was unhurried, controlled, as though the exchange had been a minor interruption rather than a direct challenge. His attention returned to her completely. It always did. You were about to leave, he said. It was not a question. She felt the truth of it settle in her chest. She had been about to disappear, to return to the edges where she could exist without consequence. She held his gaze. Yes, she said. The word was quiet, but it did not waver. He studied her for a fraction of a second longer, as though confirming something that did not require confirmation. Then he moved. One step closer, close enough that the distance between them no longer allowed for hesitation. His hand lifted again, not extended this time, directed. His fingers closed around hers, not at the wrist, not guiding, but enclosing. The contact was unmistakable, deliberate. Her breath shifted, a small, involuntary intake that she could not suppress. The room reacted, not loudly, not outwardly, but the tension sharpened, edges forming where before there had only been pressure. A lady near the front lowered her fan completely. A gentleman took a half step forward and then stopped, uncertain whether he had the right to intervene. Adrian did not look at any of them. He looked at Elena. You will not leave, he said. The words were quiet. They did not ask. They did not command. They defined. Her fingers tightened. Within his, not in resistance, not in surrender, but in recognition of the shift that had already taken place. He turned slightly, angling his body toward the orchestra. The movement was minimal. The effect was immediate. The conductor straightened, bow lifting before he seemed to realize he had moved. The first note came hesitantly, a single violin finding its place, then another, then the slow, careful return of sound to a room that had forgotten how to hold it. Adrian did not wait for the music to fully form. He stepped forward, drawing her with him, not pulling, not forcing, simply moving in a direction that no longer allowed for doubt. Elena followed. One step, then another, the rhythm beneath her feet unfamiliar, but steady. The center of the ballroom shifted again, no longer empty, no longer waiting. It belonged to them. The crowd did not part this time. It held, watching, measuring, recalibrating what it believed it understood. Adrian's hand adjusted, not releasing hers, but repositioning, guiding her into place with a precision that left no room for error. His other hand lifted, settling lightly at her side, not invasive, not hesitant, simply present. The music gathered around them, filling the space that had been suspended for too long. Elena felt it then, fully, unmistakably. The break had already happened. The structure had already cracked. And as Adrian drew her into the first movement, controlled, exact, undeniable, the room was forced to witness it in real time. The first turn did not belong to the music. It belonged to him. The orchestra followed, not leading, but catching up, as Adrian guided Elena into motion with a precision that erased hesitation before it could form. Her hand remained in his, her other lifted where he had placed it, the space between them exact, measured, intentional. The marble beneath her feet no longer felt cold. It felt exposed. Every step carried the weight of being seen. She moved because he moved, not blindly, not without awareness, but because his direction left no uncertainty about where she was meant to be. Their first pass across the floor drew a visible shift from the crowd. Heads turned fully now, not in fragments, not in curiosity, but in open attention. Conversations did not resume. They reorganized around them. Elena felt the eyes, not as a blur, but as individual points of pressure, each one assessing, questioning, recalculating. Adrian's hand at her side adjusted slightly, guiding the angle of her step, correcting the placement of her foot without words. The contact was brief, precise, and enough. "Do not look at them," he said quietly. The words were not sharp. They were exact. Elena's gaze, which had begun to drift toward the edge of the room, returned to him. Not fully, not yet, but enough to break the pull of the watching crowd. "Look at me," he added, and this time there was no room for interpretation. She did, fully. The movement was small. The effect was not. The room receded, not because it had changed, but because her focus had been redirected with deliberate force. His eyes held hers for a fraction longer than necessary, confirming, correcting, anchoring. Then he turned them both. The movement was smooth, controlled, and unmistakably practiced. Elena followed, her steps aligning with his in a rhythm she had not known she could hold. She had been taught to move quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention. This was different. This required presence. It required occupying space she had never been allowed to claim. A whisper broke from the edge of the crowd, then another. "Who is she?" someone asked, not softly enough. "Whitmore's niece," came the reply, edged with disbelief. She was not even presented. The words carried. They were meant to. Elena felt them brush against her, not as a wound, but as a reminder. This was not acceptance. This was scrutiny. Adrian's grip did not change. If he heard, he did not show it. Instead, he shifted their path slightly, redirecting them through the center of the room with a confidence that suggested the space had always belonged to him. A couple to their right hesitated, unsure whether to yield or continue. Adrian did not slow. The hesitation resolved itself as they stepped aside. It always did. Elena felt it again. The subtle recalibration of power, not announced, not declared, but enforced through movement. Alone, he stopped for a fraction of a second, not long enough to break the flow, but long enough to reposition her hand, to adjust the line of her arm, to bring her closer by an inch that felt like a decision. "You are stepping too cautiously," he said. There was no criticism in it, only correction. Elena's breath steadied. She adjusted, lengthening her stride slightly, trusting the direction he set. The next turn came sharper, more defined. Her skirt brushed against his leg, the fabric, catching the light in a brief, suspended moment before settling again. The music gathered strength, no longer hesitant, now shaped around the movement at its center. A ripple moved through the crowd as more couples began to follow, not because they had been invited, but because the absence of motion had become impossible to maintain. The ballroom reformed itself around them, but the axis remained unchanged. Elena and Adrian at its center. Lady Whitmore watched from the edge, her expression composed, her fingers tightening slightly around the handle of her fan. She spoke to the woman beside her, something quiet, something controlled, but her gaze did not leave the floor. Lord Harrington remained where he had been, his posture rigid, his attention fixed, not intervening, not withdrawing. The opposition had not disappeared. It had been forced to wait. Adrian turned Elena again, closer this time, the distance between them narrowing just enough that she could feel the steadiness of his breath, the controlled rhythm that did not falter. "You are aware of what this is," he said. The words were low, meant for her alone, but they carried a weight that extended beyond the space between them. Elena did not answer immediately. She understood the question, even if it had not been phrased as one. She understood the cost, the visibility, the impossibility of returning to the edges once this moment had been claimed. "Yes," she said finally. The word was quiet. It did not tremble. His gaze held hers for a fraction longer, searching, not for hesitation, but for confirmation. Whatever he found there, it did not cause him to stop. He shifted his hold again, not loosening, not tightening, simply reinforcing the connection in a way that left no ambiguity about his intention. They moved forward. Another turn, another pass. The room adjusted again, more visibly now, the lines between observer and participant blurring as the structure of the evening was forced to accommodate what it could not prevent. A woman near the front lowered her voice, but not enough. "He cannot mean to continue this," she said. "He already has," came the reply. Elena felt the words settle, not as doubt, but as recognition. This was no longer a moment. It was a progression. Adrian guided her through another sequence, the pattern unfolding with a precision that left no room for error. Her movements grew more certain, not because the scrutiny had lessened, but because his control over the space had not. He stopped again, not at the edge, not halfway, but at a point that forced the room to reorient once more. The music held, just for a beat, a single, suspended second where everything aligned. He looked at her, not as he had before, not assessing, not correcting, but with something sharper, something that suggested the next movement would not belong to the dance alone. "They will not accept this," he said quietly. It was not a warning. It was a statement. Elena held his gaze. "They do not need to," she replied. The words came before she could consider them, before she could measure their consequence. The silence that followed was not complete. The music resumed. The room breathed. But something had shifted again, deeper this time, more permanent. Adrian's expression did not change, but his hand did. It tightened, just slightly, not enough to restrain, but enough to confirm. And when he moved again, drawing her into the next step with a certainty that left no space for retreat, the ballroom was no longer watching to see what would happen. It was watching because it already had. The rhythm did not slow. It sharpened. Each step fell with greater precision, each turn drawing a clearer line through the space they occupied, as if the dance itself had become a declaration no one had agreed to witness, and yet could not ignore. Elena felt it in the way the floor responded beneath her feet, in the way her balance adjusted not out of caution but out of alignment with him. Adrian did not guide her as one might guide a partner unfamiliar with the movement. He positioned her as though she had always belonged within it, correcting only where necessary, expecting the rest. His hand shifted at her side, not pressing, not restraining, but anchoring her through the next turn as the music rose, fuller now, less tentative. The crowd had begun to move again, but their motion lacked cohesion, a delayed echo of what unfolded at the center. Whispers threaded through the sound, sharper now, less concealed. "This cannot stand," a woman said from somewhere close enough that Elena could hear the edge in her voice. "He is making a spectacle," another replied. "No." A third voice murmured, quieter, more precise. "He is making a point." Elena did not look toward them. She could not afford to. Adrian's earlier instruction remained, not as a rule, but as a boundary she understood instinctively. Her gaze stayed with him, steady now, not because the pressure had lessened, but because she had chosen where to place her attention. He turned her again, the movement tighter, more controlled, drawing her closer by a fraction that altered the shape of the space between them. The distance was no longer formal. It was deliberate. "You are adjusting," he said. It was not praise. It was observation. Elena matched his step, her foot landing exactly where his movement required it. "You are not leaving me room not to," she replied. The words came quieter than she expected, but they did not falter. His gaze shifted, not away, but deeper, as though reassessing the measure of her. The next turn came. Without warning, sharper than before, her skirt lifting slightly with the motion before settling again in a soft sweep across the marble. The music held for a fraction of a second, a suspended note that stretched the moment just long enough to be felt. Adrian stopped, not abruptly, precisely. The pause existed only between them, though the entire room seemed to respond to it. Elena stilled with him, her breath steady, her posture aligned, her hand still within his. The silence that followed was not complete. The orchestra continued, but softer now, as if aware that something else had taken precedence. "They will intervene," he said. It was not speculation. It was timing. Elena did not ask who. She already knew. The edges of the ballroom had begun to shift again, more decisively this time. Figures repositioning, conversations tightening into purpose. Lady Whitmore had moved closer, no longer content to observe from a distance. Lord Harrington was no longer still. He stepped forward, his path measured, his intent no longer concealed. Elena felt the movement before she saw it, the subtle change in the air that signaled a disruption approaching. Adrian resumed the dance before the interruption could reach them, drawing her into another sequence that redirected their position across the floor, not away, but through the path that would have allowed the approach. It was not avoidance. It was control. Harrington adjusted, stepping again, attempting to intercept. Adrian turned them once more, the movement clean, unbroken, placing Elena at a slight angle that shifted the line of approach just enough to delay it. The choreography extended beyond the music now. It shaped the space around them, dictating where others could and could not stand. Elena felt it with a clarity that surprised her. This was not simply a dance. It was positioning. "You are using the floor," she said, the realization forming as the words left her. Adrian did not deny it. "The floor is the only place they cannot interrupt without consequence," he replied. His voice remained low, steady, as though the statement were no more significant than the next step. Elena understood then. To cross into this space, to break the pattern publicly, would be to acknowledge the challenge outright, and no one in the room wished to be the first to do so. Harrington slowed, not stopping, but recalculating, his path no longer direct. Lady Whitmore hesitated, her hand tightening around her fan, her expression held in place by discipline that now bordered on strain. The music swelled again, reclaiming the space that had been stretched too thin. Adrian guided Elena into a longer sequence, one that carried them across the center and toward the far side of the ballroom, not retreating, but expanding the reach of their presence. Each step placed them more firmly within the structure he was redefining. The crowd adjusted again, more visibly now, forming a wider circle, the boundary between observer and participant becoming clearer, more rigid. Elena felt the weight of it settle around them, not pressing inward, but holding them in place. Contained within the moment he had created, he turned her once more. Slower this time, allowing the movement to extend, to be seen, to be understood. Her hand remained steady in his, her posture aligned, her gaze fixed where he had directed it. The room watched, not waiting now. Measuring. Adrian stopped again, the pause deliberate, positioned where the light from the chandeliers fell most clearly across them, illuminating every detail that might otherwise have been overlooked. Elena felt it, the exposure, the clarity, the impossibility of being unseen. His hand did not release hers. It tightened, just slightly, enough to anchor her within the moment as the next shift approached. Harrington stepped forward again, closer now, no longer attempting to avoid the center, his restraint thinning into something sharper. Lady Whitmore followed, not beside him, but not far behind. The space between them and the center narrowed. Adrian did not move. He did not turn. He held the position he had taken, his gaze still on Elena, as though the approaching challenge were already accounted for. When they speak, he said quietly, do not answer for them. Elena felt the words settle, not as instruction, but as alignment. She understood. This was not her confrontation to lead. It was his to define. The music softened again, not stopping, but yielding, as though the room itself anticipated the interruption. Adrian's hand shifted once more, adjusting her position by an inch that placed her exactly where he intended her to be, centered, visible, unignorable. And as the first voice broke through the boundary they had created, sharp, controlled, and unmistakably directed at him, the dance did not end. It paused, suspended at the exact point where the next movement would determine everything. Your Grace, Lord Harrington said, and this time the words did not wait at the edges of the room. They cut directly through the space that had been held so carefully in place. The music did not stop, but it thinned, the instruments pulling back as though unwilling to compete with what was about to unfold. Adrian did not release Elena's hand. He did not turn immediately. The pause that followed was deliberate, controlled, a fraction longer than courtesy required. Then he shifted, not away from her, not stepping forward, but turning just enough that Harrington fell within his line of sight while Elena remained at his side. The positioning was exact. She was not behind him. She was not separate. She was included. You will step away from the floor, Harrington continued, his tone steady, but carrying a firmness that left no room for misinterpretation, and allow the evening to proceed as it was intended. The statement was framed as guidance. It landed as instruction. Elena felt the weight of it settle across the space, the expectation that this would resolve itself if handled correctly. Quietly, without disruption, Adrian's gaze remained calm, unchanged, and what, precisely, was intended, he asked. The question did not rise. It did not challenge. It clarified. Harrington's jaw tightened, just slightly, the smallest fracture in an otherwise controlled expression. A presentation, he said, of those who have been prepared, who have been deemed suitable, who. He stopped, not because he had finished, but because the rest did not need to be said. Elena felt it anyway. Suitable, prepared, deemed. None of those words had ever been applied to her. Adrian shifted his stance by an inch, a subtle realignment that placed him more firmly beside her, the line of his shoulder matching hers rather than standing in front. The adjustment was small. The message was not. You have mistaken preparation for qualification, he said. The words were quiet, but they did not soften. They settled, precise, leaving no space for reinterpretation. A murmur moved through the crowd again. Sharper now, less restrained. Lady Whitmore stepped forward at last, closing the remaining distance with a composure that bordered on urgency. Your Grace, she said, her voice carefully measured. This has gone far enough. She did not look at Elena when she spoke. She looked only at him. That, more than anything, defined the line she was trying to restore. Adrian did not respond immediately. His attention shifted, not fully, but enough to acknowledge her presence without surrendering focus. Has it? He said. It was not a question. It was an observation placed where a question might have been expected. Lady Whitmore's fingers tightened around her fan, the delicate structure bending slightly under the pressure. She is not meant to be here, she said. The words came softer, but they carried more force. Not meant. The phrase lingered. Elena felt it, not as a new wound, but as an old one being named aloud. She did not move. She did not lower her gaze. Adrian's hand adjusted slightly around hers, not pulling, not pressing, but reaffirming the contact. And yet she is, he replied. The simplicity of it shifted something in the air, the kind of shift that does not announce itself but cannot be ignored. Harrington stepped closer, no longer circling, no longer delaying. The boundary that had been held by the dance alone had been crossed. You are placing her in a position she cannot sustain, he said. There was something sharper in it now, less controlled, less willing to remain within the confines of polite objection. Elena felt the words more clearly this time, not because they were louder, but because they were closer. Adrian turned his head fully then, meeting Harrington's gaze without interruption. "You are assuming that the position was yours to assign," he said. The response came without pause, without hesitation, as though it had already been decided before the question had formed. The room stilled. Not completely. The music continued, softer now, a thread rather than a structure, but the attention shifted entirely. Elena became aware of her own posture again, the alignment of her shoulders, the steadiness of her stance. She was no longer adjusting. She was holding. Lady Whitmore took another step forward, her voice lowering, the control returning as she recalibrated. "This will damage her," she said. This time, she did look at Elena, briefly, directly, not with concern, with calculation. Adrian's expression did not change. "It already has," he replied. The words landed differently. Not sharp, not raised, but final in a way that did not invite argument. Elena felt something shift within her at that, not outwardly, not visibly, but enough that her breath changed, deepened, steadied. Harrington exhaled, a controlled release that suggested the conversation had moved beyond where he had intended it to go. "Then you will accept responsibility for what follows," he said. Adrian did not look away. "I already have," he answered. The exchange held for a fraction longer, suspended between them, before Harrington stepped back, not in retreat, in acknowledgement that the line had been drawn and could not be redrawn without escalation beyond what the room would tolerate. The pressure did not disappear. It shifted. It spread outward again, into whispers, into glances, into the careful repositioning of those who had been forced to witness the fracture. Adrian turned back to Elena. The movement was unhurried, controlled, as though the interruption had been anticipated and accounted for. His hand did not release hers. If anything, it steadied further. "We are not finished," he said. The words were low, meant only for her, but they carried a weight that extended beyond the space between them. Elena met his gaze. She did not ask what he meant. She understood. The dance had not been the statement. It had been the beginning. Adrian shifted his stance again, repositioning them at the center, not retreating, not yielding, but claiming the space more definitively than before. The orchestra, sensing the shift, gathered itself, the music rising once more, fuller now, more certain. He stepped forward, drawing her with him into the next movement, not as continuation, but as escalation. The room did not look away. It could not. And as Elena moved with him, no longer adjusting, no longer uncertain, the tension that had filled the ballroom did not resolve. It sharpened, held in place, waiting for the moment it would no longer be contained. The music surged, no longer hesitant, no longer careful, but it did not overpower the silence that still existed beneath it, the kind of silence that lived in the spaces between breaths, between glances, between decisions that had already been made but not yet revealed. Adrian did not slow as he drew Elena forward again, his hand steady, his control absolute, guiding her into a sequence that no longer resembled a simple dance, but something sharper, something that carried intent with every step. The floor responded to him, to them, the pattern unfolding with a precision that forced the room to follow, to watch, to recalibrate its understanding of what it was witnessing. Elena felt it in the way her movements had changed, no longer cautious, no longer measured by avoidance, but aligned, deliberate, each step placed not to disappear but to hold. Their turn tightened, bringing her closer, the space between them narrowing until she could feel the exact rhythm of his breath, steady, unbroken, unaffected by the pressure surrounding them. "They will not stop," she said quietly, not looking away from him. It was not a question. It was recognition. Adrian's gaze did not shift. "No," he replied. The answer was immediate, unadorned. His hand adjusted at her side, not correcting, but reinforcing, anchoring her within the next movement as the music rose again, fuller, more insistent. The crowd had changed. It no longer whispered in fragments. It reacted in waves, visible now, undeniable. A gentleman stepped forward as though to intervene, then stopped. His movement caught mid-intention as he realized the cost of completing it. A lady turned fully away, unable to watch, then turned back again, compelled despite herself. Lady Whitmore did not move. She stood at the edge of the floor, her posture held rigid, her gaze fixed, no longer attempting to correct, only to witness. Harrington remained closer, not retreating, not advancing, positioned where the line had been drawn and left there. Adrian turned to Elena again, sharper this time, the movement cutting through the space, forcing those nearest to shift, to make room, to acknowledge the path he had set. Her skirt lifted slightly with the motion, catching the light in a brief, suspended arc before settling again. For a fraction of a second, everything aligned. The music, the movement, the gaze of every person in the room fixed on the same point. And then it broke, not outwardly, not dramatically, but in the way tension can no longer be contained and begins to fracture at its edges. "This is no longer appropriate," a voice said. Louder now, no longer attempting discretion, it came from behind. Harrington, from a man Elena did not recognize but understood immediately. Another authority, another line of resistance. Adrian did not turn. He did not acknowledge the voice. Instead, he shifted his hold, not loosening, not tightening, but changing the angle of their movement, redirecting them across the floor in a line that cut directly through the space where the voice had originated. It was not avoidance. It was dismissal. The man fell silent, not because he had chosen to, but because the moment had moved past him. Elena felt the shift, the way power could exist without confrontation, without raised voices, without force. It was in the movement, always in the movement. Adrian stopped again, not at the edge, not in retreat, but at a point that forced the room to reorient once more. The chandeliers above cast a clear light across them, illuminating every detail that could not be hidden. Her worn glove, the faint stain that remained, the precise line of his coat, the steady, unbroken hold of his hand in hers. The music held for a fraction of a second, stretching the moment into something that felt almost unreal. "You understand what they see," he said. His voice was low, meant for her, but it carried a weight that extended beyond them. Elena did not hesitate. "They see a mistake," she replied. The words came clearly, without softness, without apology. His gaze held hers, searching, not for doubt, but for certainty. "And you?" he said, the words quieter now, sharper. "What do you see?" The question settled between them, not as pressure, but as an opening. Elena felt it, the space it created, the expectation that she would either step into it or retreat. She did not look away. She did not lower her gaze. "I see that you did not stop," she said. The answer was not what the question had asked. It was what it required. Something shifted then, not in the room, in him, not visible to most, but she felt it in the way his hand tightened, just slightly, enough to confirm, enough to anchor. The music resumed, stronger now, reclaiming the space that had been suspended. He moved again, drawing her forward, not as continuation, but as escalation. The next sequence unfolded. Faster, sharper, each step placed with a precision that left no room for interruption. The crowd reacted, not with whispers now, but with movement, couples shifting, forming, attempting to reclaim the structure of the evening, but failing to displace what had already taken hold at its center. Elena matched him, her movements no longer guided by uncertainty, but by alignment, by the understanding that this moment would not allow hesitation. Another turn, closer this time. The distance between them reduced to the smallest measure that still allowed motion. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the intensity of it, the clarity of being seen, of being placed in a position that could not be undone. Adrian stopped once more, the pause sharper now, more defined, the room responding immediately, the music thinning, the movement around them faltering. His gaze did not leave hers. "When this ends," he said, the words quiet, deliberate, "it will not return to what it was." It was not a warning. It was a statement. Elena felt the truth of it settle, not heavily, but completely. She did not look away. "It already has," she said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, stretched to its limit, held in place by the weight of what had been set in motion. Adrian's hand did not release hers. If anything, it steadied further, and when he moved again, drawing her into the next step, the next turn, the next unavoidable progression, the ballroom did not react with shock. It reacted with understanding, the kind that comes too late to prevent what is already happening. The next movement did not begin with the music. It began with stillness. Adrian did not step forward. He did not turn. He held Elena exactly where she was, at the center, beneath the full weight of the chandeliers, beneath every gaze that had nowhere else to go. The orchestra faltered, not stopping, but thinning to a fragile thread that stretched across the silence like something about to snap. Elena felt it in the way the air tightened, in the way the room leaned inward without moving. Adrian's hand remained in hers, steady, unyielding, his other still at her side, not guiding now, not correcting, simply present. A pause, not long, just enough to make every heartbeat audible. Then he moved, not into the dance, not yet. He stepped forward, one measured pace that shifted their position half an inch closer to the exact center, the point where every line of sight converged. The movement was small. The consequence was not. A ripple passed through the crowd, visible this time, unmistakable, the structure of the room bending around a decision that had not yet been spoken aloud. "This ends now," Harrington said, and there was no attempt at restraint this time, no careful shaping of tone, only authority placed where it believed it belonged. He stepped forward fully, crossing the boundary of the floor. Without hesitation, the action itself drew a sharp intake from somewhere behind him. It was not done. Not like this. Not here. Adrian did not move to meet him. He did not step back. He remained exactly where he was, Elena still anchored at his side. "You will release her," Harrington continued. Closer now, the distance reduced to something that could no longer be ignored, "and restore order to this evening." The words fell with weight, expecting resolution, expecting compliance. Elena felt the pressure of it, not as fear, but as a tightening of everything around her, the moment narrowing to a point that could not hold indefinitely. Adrian turned his head then, slowly, deliberately, his gaze settling on Harrington with a calm that did not match the urgency in the room. "Order," he repeated. The word carried no emphasis, but it altered the space between them. Harrington held his ground, his posture rigid, his certainty intact. "You are disrupting it," he said. Adrian's grip on Elena's hand did not change. If anything, it steadied further. "No," he replied. "I am revealing it." The words landed with a clarity that did not invite argument, only reaction. A murmur broke from the edges, louder now, less controlled, the room no longer able to contain the shift quietly. Lady Whitmore moved again, stepping closer than she had before, her voice lower, sharper. "Adrian," she said, abandoning formality for the first time, "you are making this impossible." He did not look at her, not immediately. His attention remained on Harrington, on the line that had been drawn and now demanded resolution. "It was already impossible," he said. The answer came without hesitation, as though it had existed long before this moment. Elena felt something in her chest tighten, not painfully, but with a sudden clarity that made everything else seem distant. Harrington exhaled, controlled, measured, as if gathering himself for a final attempt to reclaim what had slipped beyond his reach. "Then you leave me no choice," he said. The words carried weight, expectation, consequence. Adrian did not respond. Instead, he moved, not toward Harrington, not away. He turned fully back to Elena. The shift was immediate, decisive, cutting through the tension with a precision that redirected it entirely. His hand lifted, releasing hers only long enough to reposition, to take her hand more firmly, more visibly, his fingers closing around hers with an unmistakable finality. The room stilled, completely this time. Even the music fell away, the last note hanging in the air before dissolving into silence. Adrian stepped forward, not into the dance, into something else. He drew Elena with him, not guiding now, not suggesting, but placing her exactly where he intended, directly beneath the central chandelier where the light fell brightest. Every detail sharpened. Her dress, her hands, the faint stain that had not fully faded. His gaze held hers, not searching, not questioning, but confirming. "Look at them," he said quietly. It was not an instruction he had given before. Elena felt the shift immediately. Her instinct resisted. Her training resisted. But she obeyed, slowly, deliberately. She turned her head, her gaze moving across the room, across the faces that had watched, judged, measured, dismissed. She saw them now, clearly, not as a blur, not as a pressure, but as individuals. Their expressions varied: disbelief, disapproval, calculation, curiosity, none of them neutral, none of them indifferent. "They have already decided who you are," Adrian said. His voice remained low, but it carried, not in volume, but in weight. Elena felt it settle, not heavily, but completely. She did not look away, not now. "Yes," she said. The word came steady. He studied her for a fraction of a second longer, then shifted again. This time, his movement was unmistakable. He turned them both, not back, into the pattern of the dance, but to face the room fully. The positioning was exact. She was no longer beside him. She was with him, aligned, visible, impossible to ignore. Harrington stood just beyond the edge of the light, his expression fixed, his authority challenged in a way that could not be undone. Lady Whitmore's composure held, but only just. The room waited, not for permission, for conclusion. Adrian's hand did not release Elena's. If anything, it steadied further. "Then let them." "Watch," he said. The words were quiet. They did not rise. They did not need to. They settled into the silence, into the space that had been stretched to its limit. Elena felt something shift then, not in the room, but within herself, the last trace of hesitation dissolving under the weight of what had already been set in motion. She did not step back. She did not lower her gaze. She stood, fully, completely. And in that suspended second, before the next movement, before the next decision, before the room could react, the balance of everything that had been assumed began to fracture in a way that could not be contained. No one moved. Not even the servants at the edges of the room dared to shift their weight. The silence had become complete now, not fragile, not waiting, but absolute, the kind that does not break until something forces it to. Adrian did not look away from Elena. His hand remained steady around hers, his presence unaltered by the pressure gathering from every direction. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing would happen, as though the entire ballroom had reached the edge of something and chosen to remain there. Then a sound cut through the stillness. Not loud, not dramatic. The soft, deliberate tap of a cane against marble. Once, then again. The rhythm was controlled, measured, and it drew every gaze toward the far end of the room without effort. The doors, which had never fully closed, shifted slightly as a figure stepped forward, older, composed, carrying a presence that did not require announcement. The Dowager Duchess of Blackthorn did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The room adjusted around her, instinctively, the way it had once adjusted. Around Adrian, but differently, with a weight that carried history, expectation, consequence. "That will be enough," she said. The words were quiet. They settled across the space with a finality that altered the balance of everything at once. Elena felt it immediately, the shift in power that did not remove Adrian's control, but challenged it with something older, something that could not be dismissed through movement alone. Adrian did not release her hand. He did not step back. He did not even turn immediately. The pause that followed was deliberate, precise, acknowledging the presence without yielding to it. Then he turned, not fully, just enough to meet the Duchess's gaze while keeping Elena within his line. The positioning remained unchanged. She was still with him. "You have allowed this to go too far," the Duchess continued, her tone even, not raised, not sharpened, but carrying an authority that did not require either. Her gaze moved briefly to Elena, not lingering, not assessing, simply noting, then returned to Adrian. "This is not how this evening proceeds." Adrian regarded her without expression. The room held its breath again, but differently now. The anticipation edged with something sharper, something closer to inevitability. "Then it will proceed differently," he said. The response was immediate, unsoftened, placed exactly where it needed to be. A murmur broke from the edges again, but it did not rise. It faltered, uncertain, caught between two forces that did not bend. The Duchess's gaze did not shift. "You mistake disruption for decision," she said. The words carried weight, not as criticism, but as correction. Adrian's grip on Elena's hand did not change. "No," he replied. "I am correcting an omission." The phrase settled, precise, and something in the room shifted again, not outwardly, but in the way attention narrowed, focused, waiting for what would follow. The Duchess tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in acknowledgement of a statement that required clarification. "Explain," she said. The word was simple. It was not optional. Adrian did not hesitate. He turned fully then, not just toward her, but toward the room, drawing Elena with him in the same motion, positioning them both so that every eye, every line of sight, every expectation converged on the same point. The light caught them both, removing any shadow that might have softened the moment. Elena felt it, the exposure, the impossibility of retreat, but she did not move. She did not pull her hand free. Adrian's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "She was not presented," he said. The statement was obvious. It had been repeated. It had been used against her. Now it was placed differently, because she was never intended to be seen. The words shifted the air, not dramatically, precisely. A pause followed, not empty, but loaded with the weight of what had not yet been said. The Duchess's expression did not change, but her gaze sharpened, focusing in a way that suggested she was no longer observing the disruption, but evaluating the argument. "And yet you insist on it," she said. Adrian did not look at her. He looked at Elena. "No," he said quietly. "I recognize it." The distinction was subtle. It changed everything. Elena felt something in her chest tighten, not with fear, but with the sudden awareness that the moment had moved beyond her entirely, into something that had been decided long before she had stepped onto this floor. Adrian shifted his stance again, not moving away from her, but drawing her slightly forward, placing her half an inch closer to the exact center. The smallest movement that carried the largest consequence. His hand lifted, not releasing hers, but adjusting, his fingers tightening just enough to anchor her within what came next. "You asked what they see," he said, his voice steady, directed not at her now, but at the room, at the Duchess, at everyone who had watched and judged and decided. "They see what they were told to see." The statement landed without force. It did not need it. The room reacted, not loudly, not outwardly, but in the way silence deepens when something has been said that cannot be dismissed. The Duchess took a single step forward. The movement was controlled, measured, and it brought her closer to the edge of the light. "And what is it you believe they have not been told?" she asked. The question was precise. It required precision in return. Adrian did not pause. "That she was never meant to stand at the edge," he said, "but at the center." The words settled, unmistakable, and for a fraction of a second, nothing moved. Elena felt it then. The shift, not in the room, but in the way the room held her, the way the weight of every gaze changed, recalibrated, uncertain. The Duchess's eyes returned to Elena, this time lingering, assessing not her presence, but her place. "You are making a claim," she said. Adrian's hand did not release Elena's. If anything, it steadied further. "I am stating a fact," he replied. The tension sharpened, reaching a point that could no longer stretch without breaking. The room waited, not for permission, for confirmation, and in that suspended second, before the Duchess could respond, before the room could decide whether to accept or reject what had been placed before it, Elena realized that whatever had just been revealed was not the end of the moment. It was the beginning of something that would not allow any of them to return to what they had been before. The silence did not break. It deepened. It stretched until it became something that could no longer be mistaken for hesitation. The Duchess did not move immediately. She stood at the edge of the light, her gaze fixed on Elena in a way that was no longer observational but evaluative, as though the room itself had been reduced to a single question and Elena had become its answer. Adrian did not release her hand. His grip remained steady, unyielding, not restraining, but anchoring her in a position that no longer allowed retreat. The crowd shifted, not outwardly, but in the subtle ways that signaled a collective recalibration, a recognition that what had been spoken could not be dismissed as impulse. Lady Whitmore's fan lowered, just slightly, her composure thinning at the edges as understanding began to replace assumption. Harrington remained still, but his posture had changed. The certainty that had carried him forward now held in check by something less defined, something that required reassessment. A fact, the Duchess repeated, her voice quiet, but carrying a weight that pressed against the boundaries of the room. Then you will present it as one. The statement was not a concession. It was a demand. Adrian did not hesitate. He turned, not away from Elena, but toward her, his movement deliberate, controlled, drawing her attention back to him while the rest of the room remained suspended at the edges of awareness. His hand shifted, not releasing hers, but repositioning. His fingers closing more firmly around her hand, his other lifting to her wrist, steadying it, aligning her posture with a precision that left no ambiguity about what would follow. Elena felt it, the shift from presence to declaration, the moment tightening into something that would define everything that came after. You were placed where they would not look, he said quietly, his voice meant for her, but carrying just enough to be heard by those closest, by those who mattered. And they accepted it because it was convenient. The words did not accuse, they clarified. Elena held his gaze, steady now, no longer resisting the weight of being seen. And you did not, she said. The response came before she could consider it, shaped not by caution but by recognition. Adrian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, settled. No, he replied. The answer was immediate. Absolute. He turned then, fully, bringing her with him in the same motion, positioning them both once more at the center, but differently now, not as participants in a disruption, but as the focus of a statement that had not yet been completed. His hand lifted, not releasing hers, but raising it slightly, just enough that the movement drew the eye, drew the room, drew the attention that had already been given but not yet directed. The gesture was small. It carried the weight of something far larger. You asked for a presentation, he said, his voice calm, controlled, unhurried, directed not at one person, but at the room, at the structure that had attempted to define itself without him. The orchestra did not play. It could not. The silence had become too complete. Then observe one. The words settled. No emphasis, no rise, just placement. Elena felt the shift before she understood it. The way the room leaned inward again, not with uncertainty, but with expectation sharpened into something undeniable. Adrian stepped forward, not away from her. With her, his hand guiding hers into a position that could not be misinterpreted, could not be dismissed. He did not speak immediately. The pause that followed was deliberate, controlled, allowing the weight of what had already been said to settle before he added to it. Elena Whitmore, he said. Her name, spoken clearly. Without hesitation, without qualification, without the diminishment it had carried when used by others. It moved through the room differently, not as an introduction, but as recognition. Lady Whitmore's breath caught, just slightly, the smallest fracture in composure. Harrington's gaze sharpened, recalculating, reassessing. The Duchess did not move, but her attention did not waver. Adrian did not look away from the room. Is not an oversight, he continued, nor an exception to be corrected. The words aligned, precise, building towards something that had not yet been stated but could already be felt. Elena's pulse steadied, not slowing, but settling into a rhythm that matched the moment, that matched the inevitability of what was unfolding. Adrian's hand tightened, just slightly, around hers, not enough to restrain, enough to confirm. She is the only presence here that was not arranged, he said. The statement cut cleanly through the assumptions that had held the evening in place. A murmur broke, sharper this time, less controlled, the room reacting not with confusion, but with recognition that something fundamental had shifted. The Duchess's gaze did not leave Elena. And you believe that grants her position, she said. The question was not dismissive. It was precise. Adrian's response came without pause. It reveals it. The distinction settled, undeniable. Elena felt it then, fully. The inversion of everything that had defined her place in the room, the quiet roles, the unseen edges, the expectation of invisibility. It did not disappear. It was replaced. Adrian turned his head slightly, just enough that his gaze returned to hers, anchoring her within the moment as it reached its peak. "You were never absent," he said quietly, the words meant for her alone, but carrying a weight that extended beyond them. "They simply chose not to see you." Elena held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not lower her eyes. Something in her posture shifted, not outwardly, not dramatically, but enough that the way she stood in the light changed, the way the room held her changed. She was no longer at the edge of anything. She was at the center. The Duchess stepped forward. Then, fully into the light, her presence no longer at its boundary but within it, her gaze fixed, not on Adrian now, but on Elena. The room followed her movement, the attention narrowing, focusing, waiting for the resolution that had been building since the moment the glass had shattered on the marble. Adrian did not move. He did not release Elena's hand. He did not lower it. He held the position he had created, allowing the moment to exist exactly as it was, without interruption, without softening. And in that suspended second, with every expectation in the room overturned, with every assumption forced into question, Elena realized that the choice had never been whether she would be seen. It had been whether anyone would have the authority to deny it once she was. The silence did not collapse. It settled. It reshaped itself around what had been said, around what could no longer be undone. The Duchess remained where she was, fully within the light now, her gaze steady on Elena, not dismissing, not correcting, but measuring something that had not been acknowledged until this moment. Adrian did not lower Elena's hand. He did not shift his stance. He allowed the weight of the declaration to exist without interruption, without retreat. The room responded in fragments, not with voices, but with movement. A lady near the front adjusted her posture, no longer angled away, but facing directly toward the center. A gentleman who had stepped forward earlier now stepped back, not in defeat, but in recognition that the ground beneath the moment had changed. Lady Whitmore did not speak. Her fan remained still in her hand, her composure held in place not by certainty, but by the absence of it. Harrington's gaze moved between Adrian and Elena, not searching for fault now, but recalculating position. The structure had not shattered. It had shifted, and no one yet knew where it would settle. The Duchess took one final step forward, not hurried, not hesitant. The movement placed her within the same space as them, not above, not apart, but directly within the line of what had been claimed. She did not look at Adrian first. She looked at Elena, fully, directly. The assessment was not unkind. It was exact. Elena felt it. The scrutiny that did not reduce her, did not dismiss her, but required her to remain exactly where she stood, without retreat, without apology. She did. Her shoulders remained aligned. Her gaze did not drop. The moment held. The Duchess's eyes shifted then, returning to Adrian. "You have made your position clear," she said. Her voice remained even, controlled, but there was something beneath it now, something that acknowledged the shift without conceding it entirely. Adrian did not respond immediately. He did not need to. The statement had already been made. What remained was whether it would be allowed to stand. The Duchess's gaze moved once more, this time across the room, across the assembled figures who had witnessed, judged, and now waited. "Then the evening will continue," she said. The words fell into place, not as approval, not as endorsement, but as a decision that could not be easily reversed. The effect was immediate. The tension did not disappear. It redistributed. The orchestra, uncertain for a fraction of a second, lifted their instruments, the first notes returning, cautious at first, then steadier, reclaiming the space that had been held too long in silence. Movement followed. Not fully, not freely, but enough. Couples repositioned, conversations resumed in fragments. The structure of the evening reassembling itself around the new center that had been defined. Adrian's hand finally shifted, not releasing Elena's, but lowering it slightly, returning their position to something that resembled the beginning of a dance, though nothing about it was the same. He did not step away. He did not reduce the distance. He held it. Controlled, deliberate. Elena felt the change, not as a release, but as a transition. The moment had not ended. It had evolved. "You may find," the Duchess added, her voice carrying just enough to reach them both. That what is seen cannot be unseen. The statement was not directed. It was placed. Adrian inclined his head, just slightly, not in deference, but in acknowledgement. That was the intention, he replied. The exchange settled, not as resolution, but as alignment. The Duchess turned. Then, not away in dismissal, but in acceptance that the line had been drawn and would hold for now. She moved back toward the edge of the light, her presence still felt, still central, but no longer opposing. The room followed her movement, the attention widening, the pressure easing, though not disappearing. Adrian turned back to Elena. The shift was immediate, the world narrowing once more to the space between them. His hand adjusted, not guiding, but reaffirming. "Breathe," he said quietly. The word was simple. It carried more than instruction. Elena realized then that she had not fully done so. Not since the moment the glass had shattered. Not since the moment everything had shifted. She inhaled, slowly, deliberately. The air felt different, not lighter, clearer. Her gaze remained steady on his. "It is not over," she said. The words came without hesitation. They did not need to be softened. Adrian's expression did not change. "No," he replied. The answer was immediate, certain. His hand lifted slightly, repositioning hers, aligning their stance once more with the rhythm that had returned to the room. The music gathered around them again, not hesitant now, but shaped by what had already been set in motion. He stepped forward, not as before, not as declaration, as continuation. Elena moved with him, not because she was guided, because she had chosen to remain. Their steps aligned again, the pattern reforming, but altered, carrying the weight of everything that had come before. The crowd watched, not with the same certainty, not with the same assumptions. The gaze had changed. The way they saw her had changed, not entirely, not completely, but enough. Adrian's hand remained steady, his presence unchanged, his control no longer contested but acknowledged. The room moved around them, the evening continuing, but the center had been redefined. Elena felt it with every step, every turn, every moment where the light caught her not as something to be overlooked, but as something that could not be. The tension did not fade. It lingered, quieter now, deeper, woven into the space that had been reshaped. And as the music carried them forward, as the room adjusted to a reality it had not chosen but could no longer deny, the moment held its final form, not as an end, as something that would remain long after the last note faded. The music did not end. It resolved. It drew itself into a final shape that felt inevitable, as though every note had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. Adrian's hand remained steady in Elena's, his presence unchanged, not diminished by what had passed, not softened by what had been accepted. The room moved around them now, no longer frozen, no longer fractured, but altered in a way that could not be undone. Each couple that crossed the floor did so with a new awareness. Each glance that lingered did so with a different weight. Elena felt it in the way the space responded to her, not retreating, not dismissing, but adjusting. She moved with him, not as someone being guided, but as someone who had chosen to remain exactly where she was placed. Their steps slowed, not breaking, not faltering, but drawing towards something that felt like an ending without losing its tension. Adrian turned her once more, the movement smooth, controlled, the light catching along the edge of her dress as it followed the arc of motion. For a fraction of a second, everything aligned again. The chandeliers above, the music beneath, the line of sight from every corner of the room converging on the same point. Then the movement stilled, not abruptly, precisely. They stopped at the center, exactly where they had begun, but nothing about the moment was the same. Adrian did not release her hand. He did not step back. The distance between them remained deliberate, measured, defined by choice. Rather than expectation, the final note of the orchestra lingered, stretched thin, then faded. Silence returned, not as disruption, but as completion. Elena felt it settle, not heavily, but with a clarity that made everything else seem sharper. The room did not immediately respond. It held, just for a breath, as though confirming that what had happened had indeed concluded. Then it shifted. Applause did not begin all at once. It started with a single sound, controlled, deliberate, from somewhere near the edge, then another, then more. Building not into celebration, but into acknowledgement. Not loud, not overwhelming, but undeniable. Elena did not look toward it. She did not need to. She felt it in the way the air moved, in the way the space no longer resisted her presence. Adrian's gaze remained on her, steady, unbroken. "You held your position," he said quietly. The words were simple. They carried more than praise. Elena met his gaze. "You did not give me another option," she replied. There was no sharpness in it, only truth. Something in his expression shifted, not visibly to most, but enough that she felt it, the smallest acknowledgement of something unspoken. His hand adjusted slightly, not tightening, not releasing, simply reaffirming the connection that had defined the entire evening. Around them, the room continued to reassemble itself, conversations resuming, movements redistributing, but the center remained marked, altered by what had occurred. Lady Whitmore approached, not quickly, not hesitantly, but with a composure that had been rebuilt rather than preserved. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze moving to Elena first this time, not avoiding, not dismissing. "You have placed us in a difficult position," she said. The words were controlled, but they lacked the certainty they had carried before. Elena did not step back. She did not lower her gaze. "I did not place anything," she replied. Her voice remained steady. "I stood where I was brought." The distinction settled between them, precise, undeniable. Lady Whitmore's expression held for a moment, then shifted, not into agreement, not into opposition, but into something less defined. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture that did not fully concede, but no longer dismissed. Harrington did not approach. He remained where he was, his gaze distant now, as though recalculating something that would not resolve within the confines of the evening. The Duchess watched from the edge, her expression unchanged, her presence still central, but no longer intervening. Adrian released Elena's hand then, not abruptly, not reluctantly, simply allowing the contact to end as cleanly as it had begun. The absence was immediate, noticeable. Elena felt the space where his hand had been, the shift in balance that followed. He stepped back half a pace, enough to change the dynamic, enough to create distance without diminishing what had been established. For a fraction of a second, it seemed as though the moment might dissolve, that the evening would continue, and this would become something remembered rather than something held. Then he extended his hand again, not as before, not to lead her into motion, but as an offering that existed beyond. The structure of the dance. Elena looked at it, not hesitating, not questioning. She placed her hand in his. The gesture was simple. It carried everything. He did not pull her forward. He turned, guiding her not toward the center, but toward the far side of the ballroom, toward the open doors where the night waited beyond the light. The movement was unhurried, controlled, and it drew the eye once more, not as spectacle, but as conclusion. The room parted, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. They walked through the space that had once resisted her, now yielding without question. At the threshold, Adrian paused. Not long, just enough. He looked at her, not assessing, not directing, but confirming. Elena met his gaze. She did not look back, not at the room, not at what had been left behind. He stepped forward. She followed. The air beyond the ballroom was cooler, quieter, the sound of the orchestra fading as the doors remained open behind them. For a moment, they stood there, between light and shadow, between what had been and what would follow. Adrian released her hand once more, the contact ending with the same precision as before. "They will speak of this," he said. It was not a warning. It was fact. Elena's gaze remained steady. "Let them," she replied. The words were quiet. They did not waver. Something in his expression settled, not into satisfaction, not into certainty, but into something that held both. He turned slightly, his gaze moving back toward the ballroom, toward the space that had been reshaped. "Then they will learn," he said. The statement was soft. It carried further than anything else he had spoken. Elena followed his gaze for a fraction of a second, just long enough to see the light, the movement, the figures that would carry this moment forward.